Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
Welcome in, listeners, to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're always talking everything college hoops. You could have been anywhere else in the dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus, and we appreciate that. And along for the ride today, we have brought in a representative from the defending national champions, the Baylor Bears, Ashley Hodge from Sikkim 365 has joined us. Please don't forget to give Ashley a follow at Sikkim 365 and follow him over at Sikkim365.com. Ashley, thanks for giving the podcast a few minutes and talking some defending champions.
Hey, man, it's good to be on, and we can say that for another 6-7 months, I guess, huh?
It's kind of nice to find that comfort spot. Welcome back, our favorite sport.
Yeah.
All right, really thankful, Austin. So let's just talk about the vibe in Waco. I feel like there still like this awe of disbelief and like wonder and newness to this national championship, or is it like okay, let's just figure out how we're going to run it back right away?
I think there's a little bit of both. I think that Scott Drew's been building to this moment, and it was a magical year, but not totally unexpected. I actually went with the team on a trip to Italy in 2019. They take these summer trips every 4 years. And I knew there was something special about these guards. I saw Davion Mitchell, Jared Butler, Maceo Teague. At the time, Devontae Bandu, who graduated, didn't play last year, but Adam Flagler was a redshirt year that year. And I knew that they had something really special brewing. So, their dedication to their craft, the focus on being about the right things, faith, academics, hard work, character development. I mean, you could see that this had the DNA of a national championship team. And I knew that after spending time with them, and then also the coaches are in their prime. Scott Drew is now, 50 years old, 51 maybe. And he's been with Jerome Tang for 17 years, one of his long-term assistants. And, Jared Nunes, they've been together a long time. Alvin Brooks and John Jacobs are great assistants. John Jacobs came from Gonzaga, and he's been known as a guard whisperer and has really made a huge difference in the backcourt. So I think all those things that really culminated in this magical season, but it's what's behind the layers that really matters, and there's substance there. It wasn't a fluke. You don't beat teams, top 10 teams by double digits without having a great, culture and tremendous coaching and tremendous schemes, so all that's a part of the DNA. So I think they have the formula to do it again. Now, obviously it's going to be really hard, but they have a pretty good roster, and we'll see how things transpire. And
that's why they play the games, and that's why it's a single elimination tournament. And you can lose to anybody any night when it comes to March. And Baylor barely lost to anybody last season. It seemed like everything went according to plan. Please brag, boast, gloat, retell. Like, share one thing of how special this championship season was in Waco. And maybe, dig something up for the listeners that is going to remind them, like, let's not leave the Bears out of the national championship conversation this year.
Well, I think if we look back, I knew – going into the NCAA tournament, and I was in Indianapolis for most of it. I came for the Villanova game, Sweet 16 game, and they were coming off a COVID pause where they lost a couple games. They had a 21-day, it was legitimate. It wasn't like one of these, they had a lot of guys that had COVID and were pretty sick during the time. So to get their win back and get back in shape to be anything close to what they were before the COVID pause, it took them a few games. And I really felt that the Villanova game was going to be the key game. And they were down in that game, like 35-29 at halftime. And it was just one of those second halves where, Davion Mitchell said, not today. He just dominated on both ends of the court. I think Villanova turned it over 7 straight possessions. I mean, that's crazy for a Jay Wright team. Jay Wright's one of the best, obviously, top 5 coaches in the game, and their teams are so well prepared and almost never turn it over. And then, just they were able to blow by the Villanova guards and get easy buckets at the rim. And so I think that was the key game, I thought after that game that they wouldn't lose another one. I thought even Gonzaga, was going to be they were going to present some real huge matchup problems for Gonzaga, and that ended up being the case. So I think the Villanova game was the key moment. As far as this season, I would say that I think that they've got a loaded roster and arguably more talent than they had last year. Now, the backcourt is one of the best backcourts in college basketball history, and you win with experienced guards.
Correct.
So I'm not saying they'll be better. But I think they got 4 or 5 NBA players on this roster, and when you have 4 or 5 NBA players, I think you got a shot at doing some special things. So we'll see how it all melds together.
Well, you mentioned that the coaching staff is in their prime, and it's odd. We always talk about like, oh well, Kevin Durant is just at the peak of his prime currently. And we always talk about players, but we never refer to coaches being in their prime. Obviously, that time period or that time span might be a little bit longer. But right. I like how you referenced that the entire coaching staff might be coaching in their prime. And you mentioned the guard whisper. I mean, obviously your backcourt last year was like absolutely devastating, and it showed. And it has, a lottery pick, an NBA player, another player that was on the Utah Jazz summer league team and is going to get a contract at some point. So the fact that you had 3 NBA perimeter players in a championship game speaks volumes of how talented your team was. And if you say that they're as talented this year, look out.
Well, the front court, the guards aren't as talented, but the front court is probably got 3 or 4 NBA players. So I mean, we'll see how that all molds together. But it's a different type of team and more the traditional Scott Drew team with this length. I mean, he's got crazy wingspan on this upcoming team, and last year, that's what Scott Drew was known for, was playing that zone. And, the crazy length. And then, last year was more guard oriented. And I think he'll have a pretty good mixture this year, but definitely, some of the more talented players are in the front court.
All right, let's jump into the transfers. And you mentioned Gonzaga before. We can throw Oregon into this conversation. Nevada, Baylor owns a successful, history with transfers as well. And the transfer portal has never been busier than it has been this past season, or this past off season, I should say. Catch up listeners on just who might be one of those players that's going to impact winning this year for Baylor that's coming in, whether it be in the backcourt or the front court.
Yeah, well, it starts with James Akinjo. He was an all Pac-12 guard at Arizona. And, one coach described him this way. I thought it was a great analogy. Do you have kids by chance? Are you a father?
Two daughters, yeah. Okay,
all right. So you'll relate to this analogy. One of the coaches told me, he said, actually, have you ever had to put together Christmas presents at 2 a.m. and I'm in my 50s, and I've had to do that when my kids were younger, and had some really frustrating moments, putting together doll houses or mechanical cars and things like that. And he said James Akinjo is a fully assembled Christmas present, and I thought that was a great analogy for fathers. He's a guy that's coming to Baylor with a pedigree of an all Pac-12, all conference. He's a proven 15 point per game, 6 assist guy in college. He's young. He's only 20 years old. He started at Georgetown as a freshman at age 17, which is crazy because most kids, delay they take that extra year in high school and they're 19-year-old freshmen, but he's been playing college ball now. It's his 4th year and he's only 20 years old. So I say that to say he might have some upside that, some of these older guys may not have, but he's really, really competitive. And, he's got that Davion Mitchell dog, mentality. He's tough. He's competitive. So I think he's going to be a really good, it's hard to replace Mitchell. Mitchell's incredible, but he's a real deal. And I think he's going to be, one of the best point guards in college basketball. The other guy is Dale Bonner, who's a Division II transfer. Right. And I think he's a tough-minded kid. He's from Ohio. He's more like an Adam Flagler in the sense that he'll probably need that red shirt year, so to speak. He'll be able to play, but I think he's going to be more. This is going to be more of a preparation year for the future. But he's, they're really excited about him as well. But James Akinjo is the guy that they're going to rely on to really give him production from the get-go.
I mean, you're mentioning that, he has part of Mitchell. That's one of the highest compliments you can give a lead guard. in college basketball without question. And we were pretty familiar with Akinjo being on the East Coast and being Big East followers, of course. So to see him bounce around and then find a home with you in Waco, I'm hoping he finds success, just because, you always root for your hometown guys. So we're rooting for our, former Big East lead guard in Akinjo, and it's going to be interesting to see what they can do, see if they can work their transfer magic again.
Right.
All right, let's move over to the freshman part of the roster. Baylor has always had a varied history of bringing in, whether it be top level freshmen, or maybe wait and see freshmen that they can grow. So what did Coach Drew and his staff decide to do this particular class? And what kind of student athlete are we going to find on the floor that's going to influence winning for Baylor this season, maybe as a freshman on, a roster that you say is pretty loaded?
Yeah, I think all three of the freshmen are going to be in their top 9 rotation. They've got Kendall Brown, who many NBA scouts think could be a one and done. I mean, we'll see. He's a guy that's like crazy athletic. He's 6'8". He's got a 43 inch vertical.
Oh boy.
You talk about, like, in basketball, you got horizontal spacing, but you also got vertical spacing. If you got guys that can go get it at 12 feet, that's a weapon. And Kansas used to kill Baylor with Azubuike, because he's a guy they could just throw lobs to at 12 feet and he would go get it. He would dunk it or finish around the rim. Baylor's got several guys. Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua is another one that can go get it at 12 feet, but Kendall Brown's definitely one of those guys. So he's a freak athlete. He's going to do some things that just awe you. Shooting wise, it's his outside shot needs some work. He can put it on the floor. He's a good passer, a good defender. And then Langston Love is a 6'4" guard from Montverde. He's from Texas originally. Very mature kid. Does everything the coaches tell him to do. One coach described him this way. He said, this was a quote that I've heard before: the best ability is predictability. And whether you can trust a guy to do things that you tell him to do as a coach, Langston's that guy. Like, Langston is never in the wrong position. He does everything the coaches tell him to do. He's a solid shooter. I think he has a chance to really help them from the guard position. And then finally, Jeremy Sohan is the guy that nobody knows about. He started in the States, but he went and played in Europe last year.
Right.
He's a top 50 kid, 6'9", 230, extremely versatile. Reminds me of Jeremiah Robinson Earl. So if you're an East Coast guy,
sure.
I mean, that's kind of his skill set. He can make threes. He's got a variety of moves in the post. He's tough. He's a rebounder. He's a shot blocker. And I think he's going to find a way to get a pretty significant amount of playing time. He's probably the most ready from a skill standpoint. Not as good of an athlete as Kendall Brown, but he's plenty athletic and he can really move his feet well. So those are the 3 freshmen. I think they'll make a big impact.
The fact that you're comparing Sohan to an NBA player now in Jeremiah Robinson Earl, and he had versatility on the defensive end. Right. He could guard multiple positions.
Right.
He could defend at the rim a smidge. He can obviously help on the defensive rebounding, and he turned himself into a decent shooter. So if you're saying like that skill set exists inside a freshman that you have now, that sounds like it might work on the college level and maybe even beyond. All right, and then you mentioned Everyday John. So let's get to the returning players. Baylor graduated, so much NBA talent. Like we mentioned, Mitchell was a lottery pick. You had an All-American, first-team All-American. You have another player that was in the summer league. So, Austin, what remains from college basketball's apex predator last season on the roster?
Well, Flo Thamba, 7'5" wingspan. I mean, he's a tough-minded big, and bigs get better with Scott Drew's development over time. And so he's a senior now, and he's not going to wow you with his bounce off the floor. I mean, he's pretty limited from that standpoint, but he moves his feet really well horizontally. He can switch, ball screens really well. He's tough. He's strong. He's smart. So I think he's going to be an anchor for them down low. Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua, you mentioned, he's a freak athlete, crazy motor. I think he's a breakout star potential guy. I think he'll lead the Big 12 in rebounding. This is a year where there's not going to be as many quality bigs for the Big 12, and certainly McCormick at Kansas is one, and there's some others that would fit the bill, but I think Chama Chachua is going to be up there with one of the better bigs in the Big 12, and then you got Adam Flagler, who I mentioned, part of the quartet of great guards they had last year. John Rothstein had him as the Big 12 Player of the Year, and I certainly think he's capable of that. 45% 3-point guy, great floater, great finish at the rim, and great athlete. People don't know this about him. Another 40+ inch vertical guy. So he could do some things that probably hasn't shown consistently. Matt Meyer, he's going to be getting all the attention.
Right.
We like to refer to it as the Matt Meyer experience. Sometimes it's a 45-point, 16 rebound potential, and other times it's a 2 for 11 or 2 for 13 game. But I think he's really worked on being more mature, being more consistent, and they certainly need him to be that. And then finally, LJ Cryer is the one that
right.
I think he's a guy that he's an elite shooter. I was told he shot over 50% from three in scrimmage situations this summer. Baylor plays really good defense, so that's impressive. He's a guy that, he averaged over 31 points a game at the highest level of Texas high school ball. And, the guards were so good, he just didn't get much time last year. But I think he's a 10-point per game capable scorer. So I think that's the 5 guys that you're going to look at to really, give them production this year.
Yeah, I love the Matt Meyer experience. That's a great phrase and exactly what it is, because not only are you getting like that type of production, or in the worst case scenario, lack of production, but you're also getting a hairdo. You're getting some sort of like dive on the floor. You are getting the full Matt Meyer experience. And I wasn't aware that Flagler is that level of athlete, and I think that falls into the same category that you just mentioned. Like, there just wasn't that opportunity to show that because there was so much talent on the perimeter for the Bears last season. So I'm looking forward to his expanded role and his expanded opportunity on the offensive end. Let's get inside this Big 12. The Big 12 is a little bit in flux. We have a couple of members that are going to be on the move, and then what does the Big 12 do moving forward? Who they invite in, if they invite anybody in? So where will Baylor, make trees instead of tables as far as that's concerned, and define success, and maybe give us a little insight on what might be cooking inside the Big 12 with some of those teams?
Well, it's interesting. With change comes opportunity, and I was talking to one of the upper level executives at Nike, and he thought this would be huge for Baylor because Baylor's a Nike school, Kansas is an Adidas school, but he thought that in the past, Baylor would always get maybe a little bit of second class treatment because Texas was a Nike school, and it would always ruffle their feathers if Nike showed Baylor too much love within the Big 12. But now that, Texas and OU are gone, I think that, Baylor could really get some love, from Nike that maybe they haven't gotten in the past. So there's an opportunity there for Baylor. Houston, as long as Kelvin Sampson is there, is going to be a great basketball program. Right. I think Cincinnati's historically been a great basketball program. BYU's been very solid and terrific fan support. UCF, a little bit up and down, but they've, certainly been trending in the right way. So I think from a basketball perspective, as long as the Big 12 holds on to Kansas and Baylor keeps ascending, and I think Oklahoma State's on the rise. I think there's some potential there to really be one of the top 2 or 3 basketball conferences for sure. And I think the fans are excited about it because it's with Texas and OU, they're juggernaut schools, but it's kind of nice to see everybody in your conference is more of an equal, from a revenue standpoint. And I think that's what the future might hold.
Yeah, and you can just like isolate that to the Longhorn network by itself, and boom, you have the inequalities that you're speaking of,
Right.
as far as income and opportunity, whether it be for exposure or for just general income for the university. But yeah, the Nike influence, and Oklahoma being a Nike school as well, yeah, that makes total sense. So now maybe there's a bigger imprint for Nike to have inside the Big 12. That kind of makes sense.
Well, and don't get me wrong. I mean, Chris Beard changes the dynamic a little bit with Texas, but I mean, Scott Drew was 10-2 against Shaka Smart, and probably, one of the reasons why Shaka is no longer at Texas. I mean, Scott Drew and some other programs, really owned him, and I think, so just because you have all those advantages doesn't mean it translates onto the court. You gotta have the culture, you gotta have the hard work piece. You got to have, the ability to keep players in your program for a few years. And, that's, sometimes when you're the flashier program, it's maybe a little bit more difficult to do that because you got a lot of outside distractions that you don't have in a Waco, Texas.
That's true. Yeah. That might be one of the underlying factors, Ashley, of name, image, and likeness. If it's over the top, like it might be at a Texas or an Oklahoma, it just might be another thing that is going to, like you use the word distraction. That's the perfect terminology to use. And then that student athlete, doesn't have the production on the court or maybe even the classroom that they would assume that they would have, but at a place that's cozy, like we'll use Waco. We can throw in Gonzaga into that category as well. Yeah. Maybe name, image, and likeness isn't such a distraction and packaged in a much smaller present to visit back to the 2 a.m. Christmas wrapping. And then it's not as distracting and it's much more controllable. And if you can control the controllables, that sounds like a reason of success. Let's get into the non-conference schedule, right? Sure. This thing is always loaded as usual. Scott Drew has never been afraid the past number of years to go out and play people. They're always one of the names in one of these big tournaments for the preseason big tournaments. What's one of the contests or two that listeners should circle and then be able to deduce, okay, this Baylor team is for real. We need to plug them back in to, the top level conversation.
Well, yeah, it's hard. I mean, Scott Drew has had a philosophy the last 10 years of playing a really tough non-conference schedule. And I like it. I mean, it prepares them for the Big 12 slate, and it really prepares them for the NCAA tournament. But this year is no different. They've got Villanova at home, and they've beaten Villanova 2 times in a row. So getting that third win in a row against Jay Wright is going to be a tall task. I mean, I think Villanova's got that game circled on their schedule. But that's in Waco in December. They've got at Oregon. Oregon's always got a talented roster. Yep. They're at Alabama as part of the Big 12 SEC Challenge. Dang. And then, they got Stanford at home. That's not an easy game. And Stanford's got, what's the freshman? Harrison Ingram, right, who's from the Dallas area. And then finally, that Thanksgiving tournament is in the Bahamas is really tough. They got Arizona State, VCU, Syracuse is on their side of the bracket. And then if they continue to win, then they've got Auburn, UConn, Loyola, and Michigan State on the other side of the bracket. So those are 3 tough games. So you're talking seven tough games there in the non-conference, and they'll be very battle tested with their non-conference. And I think what was the second part of your question? I think is the game everybody's looking forward to.
Yeah, I think the one thing that Baylor fans and Villanova fans might want to take into the calculus of figuring out that game is, you mentioned the turnovers that Villanova had the second half and the great halftime adjustments that Coach Drew made. Colin Gillespie was not there, was not part of that. So that obviously was a factor into that, tide turning.
No question.
He's back, and he doesn't have, Mitchell hounding him around for 94 feet. So I'm interested to see how much that sways the outcome of the game and how much Gillespie's calm influence at the point guard position, at the lead guard position is going to, hold up against the defense that's waiting for him in Waco, especially in Waco. That's going to be crazy. And how many quad 1 win opportunities are there on that schedule? I mean, you just listed off 7, maybe 8. the fact that those opportunities are there, I mean, obviously, if you're the national champion, that's going to be there for you. But not every program lines it up like that. That is aggressive and impressive.
Well, yeah, and considering the Big 12 itself, I mean, you're looking at probably a 6 bid league, maybe 7 bids, and certainly Texas, Kansas, and Baylor are getting a lot of preseason love, but I think Oklahoma State and Texas Tech are going to be really tough teams. They bring a lot of experience. In fact, I'll lay something controversial down. I actually think I submitted my picks for the Big 12, and I had Kansas won, although I'm kind of flip flopping. I think Baylor and Kansas are going to be deciding the league personally. And then I have Texas Tech 3rd, Oklahoma State 4th, and Texas 5th. And here's my rationale. Texas has an amazing group of transfers coming in, and they've got a couple returning players, especially in the backcourt, Courtney Ramey and Andrew Jones, that are really good, proven guys. But those guys, like the guys that they have in that top 8 or 9, played over 300 minutes last year at different places, and a lot of those guys played on losing teams, and. I always am skeptical, especially for a first-year coach, to how that all melds together. I think experience and continuity is huge, and I think Oklahoma State and Texas Tech have it. Baylor certainly has it. Kansas has that. So I'm a little skeptical of how good Texas is going to be. But they're not shying away from it. I mean, Chris Beard said, we're like the New York Yankees. We're like the Los Angeles Lakers. We want all the smoke. And I saw Texas basketball put this out on their Twitter feed the other day. They said the hype is real. I mean, they're definitely leaning into the hype. But call me a skeptic. Chris Beard went to the national championship in 2019. The next 2 years, Texas Tech was picked, preseason top 15 both years. And they finished, I think, a combined 18-18 in the Big 12. And they were a bubble team when COVID hit, and they made the tournament last year, but then, won a game, and then they took a loss to Arkansas in the round of 32. But I think that, I think there's a little bit of a halo effect over Chris Beard because of that national championship run. That is a little undeserved, in my opinion. We'll see how it plays out. I think he's a terrific competitor. If you want to dive into the stats a little bit, he's 3-7 against Scott Drew. He's 2-8 against Bill Self. He's 5-7 against Bob Huggins. He split his games with Mike Boyden. So he hasn't proven that he can beat the better coaches in the league consistently. And I think for him to, get the accolades, I kind of jokingly call him John Wooden Jr. sometimes because he has it's like they think he's a top 5 coach in the game, and he hasn't proven that he's a top 5 coach in the game yet. So we'll see how they pan out. I think there's a lot of promise, but I'm a skeptic as far as how good they'll do this year.
I love that you're on the other end of the spectrum, the prediction spectrum with Texas. That is contrarian. It's everything that we want to hear on a podcast. It's beautiful. And, it's funny. We were having a conversation previously in the season about just, where do you place Coach Beard in, the Pantheon and like in the rankings and the stackings? And is he a top 10 coach? Should he be mentioned in the top coach in the sport? And I think you brought up some valid points that, the jury should still be out. And the last thing I think I have to add to that is, are any of the transfers, whether it be Marcus Carr or anybody else that he brought in, as good as Keenan Evans? Because Keenan Evans dragged that team. I don't know. Are any of them as good as Keenan Evans on one leg? Because he was playing on one leg for a lot of those games too.
Keenan Evans was incredible, and then after that, of course, you had Jarrett Culver and Matt Mooney and who was a big guy? He was a transfer from Tariq Owens from St. John's.
Yes,
their shot blocker.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, very, very instrumental part. They had a lot of older guys that Tubby Smith recruited. And give him credit. I mean, the way he got him to play, and but there is some question as to whether Mark Adams and those teams were all top 5 defensive teams, and Mark Adams was really the architect of that defensive strategy, and he's now the head coach of Texas Tech. And I think he's got a really talented roster. And, boy, that's going to be must-see TV to watch those games, Texas Tech versus Texas, because if I'm a betting guy, and if you said who's going to sweep who, I think Texas Tech has a better odds of sweeping Texas than Texas has of sweeping Texas Tech. So we'll see if that plays out, but that's what I'm going to stake my claim on.
I think we got everything we needed from this podcast. We got some wagering advice. We had some controversial in Big 12 predictions. Ashley, thank you so much. Totally appreciate the time. Again, please give Ashley a follow over at Sikkim365 on Twitter, and go ahead and look everything up that they're over at Sikkim365.com. Ashley, thank you so much for a couple of minutes. It was a really enjoyable conversation, and I hope to catch up later on this season.
Hey, I love it. And you guys have an awesome podcast. I'm a faithful listener, so keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you. We'll try. That's a little pressure, but we'll give it our best effort. So please don't forget to give Ashley some kindness and follows over on the Twitter universe. And cheers. Cilantro. Gotcha, everybody. Arigato. I'm addicted to the appetite. It's